And now, please give a warm welcome to the host of Broadway Buzz, Mr. Joe Gary.
Welcome to Broadway Buzz. I'm Joe Gary, and I'm delighted to welcome you to The Notebook. This is an extraordinary theater event. It really transforms the way a musical is presented. It's sensitive, delicate, it's a tribute to love. It is a story about the enduring quality of love that's even able to create miracles. So let's go to the beginning and see how this extraordinary work happened. Let me introduce you to Nicholas Sparks. Nicholas Sparks started out being a young man with great promise physically. He wanted to be a great athlete. He wanted to be a great track and field runner. He was given a scholarship to Notre Dame University, where he broke records there that still hold today. As a young student there, however, he was injured and his career was seriously interrupted. He still has a lifelong interest in track and running, but obviously no longer able to compete. As a young man, the hopes was that he would go to the Olympics. But all of this would be bad for his career as an athlete, but all of this would be brilliant as his career as an artist. At Notre Dame, he was very serious. He had a straight A average. He graduated magna cum laude in business. He married a beautiful young girl, and they moved to New Bern, North Carolina. He was an entrepreneur, but in his heart, he really loved writing. And all of his time at Notre Dame, he took courses in writing. And so he had tried 2 novels that failed. But he said to his wife, we're here, we're settled, we're ready to start a life and ready to start a family. But let me take one more opportunity to try and write. And so in a 6-month period, he would write The Notebook. The Notebook is somewhat autobiographical in that it's based on his wife's grandparents. They lived in the South. Again, as you remember, in the South in that period, there's still lots of social class issues. And one of the grandparents came from, quote, a better family than the other. But they had this powerful love that transcended all these obstacles. At the same time, Nicholas Sparks became very interested in Alzheimer's disease. And again, we know in our lives that it touches everyone. No one doesn't know someone who's suffering the horrors of the Alzheimer's disease that literally erases your past. So Nicholas, in this story, this beautiful love story about 2 people who, found love all through their lives, but also then ultimately had the ultimate struggle of dealing with Alzheimer's, trying to erase that love. So he would write this book. It's a short book. It's an easy read. You can read it in one evening if you're a fast reader, 2 if you're not. I really recommend you read it. I do have to warn you, though, if you start to read it, you're not going to be able to put it down. Nicholas Sparks is a master at creating character, at creating atmosphere, and creating this ambience of love that is so potent. This novel joins the ranks of love story, of Bridges of Madison County. It's an extraordinary work. But I just want to show you the ironies of how things happen. Number one, to have an understanding wife who would say, yes, take the 6 months, see what you can do. He submitted the book, and it was on an agent's desk. They call the agent's desk a slush pile, because there are so many scripts piled up, and maybe the agent, if he's so inclined, will pull out one of the unread novels and read it. Lucky for Nicholas Sparks, this is what happened to him. He found this extraordinary agent. His book would end up by accident on her desk. She would take it home and read it, and realized the power of the work. She was a very first-class agent, and ultimately she was able to sell that book for $1 million by an unknown failed writer. And then, of course, it took off, went to the New York Times bestseller list for 56 weeks. Nicholas Sparks would go on in his career to write 24 novels. Of those novels, 11 of them would become bestsellers. Of those novels, 11 of them would be turned into films. 4 of them are in development, either to be developed as a film or as a television series. He has sold over 115 million books worldwide. His books are translated into 50 languages, and he's been an enormous success. The people who love the novel are so devoted to it, and because he loves to set everything in New Bern, North Carolina, which is his home, and he creates this atmospheric environment that's so potent. When you read a Nicholas Sparks book, you keep going, what's going to happen next? And you keep turning page after page, and you keep saying, well, at the end of the next chapter, I'll put it down, and you really can't. So he's a master storyteller. He's been exceedingly generous. He's one of the most successful writers working in America, in the world, literally. But he's exceedingly generous. He's given over $10 million to an educational institution that focuses on global problems. He's clearly a citizen of the world, even though he's very entrenched in his beloved coastline city of New Bern, North Carolina. Also, he has this strong sense of creating an atmosphere that is so potent. The first thing you want to do when you finish the novel is to tell the person you love how grateful you are that you have that person in your life. But the second thing you want to do is to immediately go to those mid-Atlantic coastline spaces that are so beautiful with their barrier islands. He would also give almost $1 million to the high school in New Bern to develop its track program. He is sort of the unofficial coach of that program. And he's just been a good citizen all these years and has contributed very significantly to the state and health of the modern novel. And he's given us a classic. So if you haven't read the novel, I strongly recommend you consider doing it. It is, of course, the basis for all of the other works that would follow. Keep in mind there's a famous movie that will follow, and now we have this brilliant and touching and original musical. One of the things I want you to understand about the original novel, it begins with an old man in a nursing home reading from a notebook to an old woman. In the novel, they are unnamed for a period of time. But what becomes very clear very early on is the notebook is really going to be the story of their lives. We discover that Allie, the woman, Noah, the husband, have been deeply in love for over 60 years. And we see a series of flashbacks in the telling of this beautiful love story. And again, any great love story is always thwarted. They are, as young lovers, the star-crossed lovers out of Romeo and Juliet. I mean, it is the story of a young girl from a very wealthy family who comes to summer in this resort town where she meets a young boy who has dropped out of high school, who's working, technically with his hands as a carpenter. And it's this beautiful story, but of course the family wants to protect their beloved daughter. She's been given a golden life, and they don't want it interfered with by this love affair. So that's the beginning of the story. So the story is basically a story of young lovers being thwarted, young lovers reconnecting after a 7-year period, and then their life story, told as sort of a flashback. Beautifully developed, beautifully rendered as a novel. In 2004, it would be turned into an extraordinary film. So number one, we have this classic novel, that's in league with the great love stories. People are exceedingly devoted to the novel. And then suddenly a movie comes out. Well, they had planned the movie for almost 6 years. Hollywood, first of all, took his second novel, which was Message in a Bottle, and that was turned into a film before Notebook. Message in a Bottle was enormously successful as a novel, and then it was also enormously successful as a film. And there's nothing Hollywood likes more than success and money. So of course they optioned the Notebook. And for several years they planned on making it a vehicle for Tom Cruise. The story is told from the point of view of Noah, but it's told from the point of view of the old Noah looking back on his life. So they could never quite get that story in focus using, the superstar in the lead. The next thing that happened was it was offered to George Clooney, who was an up-and-coming artist at the time, and they were going to use Paul Newman as his father in the story, and that project fell apart. Happily, because what would happen is finally the film would fall into the hands of Nick Cassavetes. Now, many of you, of course, remember his father, John Cassavetes, who was a great filmmaker who made some of our great art films, and he worked very closely with his wife, Gina Rollins, in the creation of their work together. So Nick Cassavetes would hire his mother, Gina Rollins, to play the old Allie in the film. And she gave a luminous performance. But his theory was you couldn't use a famous young man playing Noah. Is this sort of dropout kid who reads Walt Whitman, who loves poetry, who would rather sit with his guitar and watch the sunset than go to corporate meetings. He had a different view of life and a very poetic view of life that would be very seductive, of course, to the young Allie. And the greatest gift, of course, that the young boy would give to the young girl is his belief in her as an artist. In the story, you will find out that she goes on to become a world-class painter. None of this ever would have happened if she had relied on the family that was providing her with the perfect life, or the perfect young man who was the head of a law firm who was going to marry her. None of that would have happened in her life. She wouldn't have realized herself. And one of the things that this story tells so beautifully is that in the power of love, we flourish and we grow and we develop together. And it's developed brilliantly in the novel and very successfully in the film. So Nick Cassavetes cast then a young, unknown Ryan Gosling. And Ryan Gosling was born to play this role. And he's extraordinary as Noah in the story. And then he cast Rachel McAdams, who was the meanest of the mean girls in that movie. But in this case, she's playing this very delicate, sensitive young girl at the brink of womanhood, ready to blossom and trying to deal with who she really is and what she's going to do in the world. So these two young lovers are perfectly cast. Unlike the novel, which focuses so strongly on a very particular place in North Carolina, they filmed this in South Carolina near Charleston. And of course, that's a magnificent coastal area, and Charleston is a beautiful city. One of the major elements, one of the great metaphors of the novel is that where they make love for the first time is an old, abandoned, antebellum house. And it's in ruins. But this is where they fall in love. And Noah promises Allie that he will spend the rest of his life finding the money to buy that property and to reconstruct it to the glory so that it will be a monument to their love. So a beautiful idea. So they picked this extraordinary antebellum house that's in Charleston. It's now, people make pilgrimages from all over the world to come to see the house where the young lovers first made love, and the house that is a symbol of their enduring quality of love. But the other thing that happens is they film at these sort of barrier islands about 10 miles from Charleston called Seabrook. And again, an extraordinary location. If you've been to that part of the world, you know those backwaters and the swamp areas and the hidden lakes are all extraordinary. And so in the movie, Nick Cassavetes, like the original novelist, is able to bring to life the atmosphere of that location in a very powerful way. There is one of the great scenes in the movie, anyone who sees the movie remembers this, of course, where the young boy takes the young girl on a canoe trip to a backwater area where there's a sort of hidden lake where we see this extraordinary collection of swans and exotic birds. And it's one of the most sensual sequences in a film I've ever seen. And then, of course, there's a famous rainstorm that we know from the novel, and their love is reconsummated, almost a decade after they first met. So visually dazzling, the film is extraordinary. But the film, while it follows the same structure of the novel, sort of downplays the Alzheimer's and sort of plays up the young lovers and plays up the sensuous quality and the exotic locale. So the things that people most remember from the movie are not in the film. It's true to the structure of the novel, but it's not true to the structure of the film. Okay, so in any case, then what would happen? The film would go on. It would be made for $29 million. It would make $117 million. It would play everywhere in the world. It was one of the most beloved, watched films of the time. And so it has great success, and there are those people that love the film that don't know the novel. There are those people that love the novel and didn't want to see the film because they so loved the novel. But in any case, they're both major works of art, and they both function perfectly in their form. The novel of The Notebook is structured in a perfect way. The creation of the film, The Notebook, makes it a cinematic masterpiece and a great delight to see. Okay, so now we come to the creation of our musical. The musical would take 7 years to create, so we're looking at 2007. And let me introduce you then to Kevin McCollum. Kevin McCollum is one of Broadway's greatest producers. He has worked for 25 years. He has given us such a range of musicals. He would win the Tony Award for Best Musical for 3 major events. Rent, which we know is an original and groundbreaking work. It really redefines the modern musical theater. Avenue Q, with all of its wonderful curiosities and the using of puppets. And remember, Avenue Q is the only musical that had full frontal puppet nudity, I might add. And then finally, he would create the masterpiece In the Heights that would introduce the brilliance of Lin-Manuel Miranda. So Kevin McCollum is a first-class act. He had just optioned The Notebook for development, and he was at a cast party he was throwing where he would meet a young composer, Ingrid Michaelson. Let me talk about her for a moment if you don't know her. She is an Indies pop composer and performer. She plays the keyboard and sings in this very haunting way. She is also an Indies folk composer, and a lot of her music really lends itself to the tradition of folk. Her lyrics tend to be very powerful, very symbolic, very poetic, but like haiku poetry, using few words to create essences. So she's a very poetic composer. She sings in a very haunting voice. I really recommend you go out and listen to some of her records. They're extraordinary. Also very interesting, you can go on YouTube and see this, hear how she sings some of the songs from the show versus the way they're performed in the show. It's extraordinary to realize the elasticity of a song, that it can be so delicately sung in a small range voice or then created in a much bigger theatrical voice for the stage. So in any case, Ingrid Michaelson is a very ambitious young woman. She had just lost both of her parents, so she was very familiar with the issues of grief and pain and loss. And so in that evening with Kevin McCollum, she said, "What are you working on?" And he said, "Oh, I've optioned The Notebook." And she said, "Oh, I love the book. I've read it many times. I love the movie. I've memorized every sequence. Could I write some songs? Do you have a composer?" And Kevin said, "No, not yet. So why don't you send me some songs?" Well, the next day, Ingrid Michaelson went home that night from the party, stayed up all night, and wrote the defining song from the show. The final song in the show is called "I Know," and it is brilliantly sung and brilliantly placed for old Allie to sing, and it's a devastating, powerful song. So this blows Kevin McCollum away. Number one, that she could come up with such a great song so quickly, but also it tuned his ear immediately to the idea of, I can't be doing a traditional Broadway musical. There's going to be no Jerry Herman, no Hello Dolly in this show. We're never going to hear a brass sound ever, and we're not going to do key changes, and we're not going to do a series of modulations in a song. Rather, he understood when he heard that song that the real voice of this show would be this delicate music that would reveal character in a very powerful and very simplistic and very poetic way. Remember, in our story, Noah is a musician. He plays the guitar. He's a kind of poet. He's memorized all of Walt Whitman. So it's so appropriate that the lyrics in this show that are going to be brilliantly written by Ingrid will be these dense, tiny little phrases that will lead us totally to the characters' souls. Beautifully developed. So not only does she stop with that first song, but then she bombards poor Kevin with more and more music. Finally, he calls her and says, "Okay, I think you better stop. Yes, I'm going to hire you as composer, but let me put together the rest of the crew." Now, one of the things I want you to realize, that one of the things that makes Kevin McCollum so brilliant as a producer is putting together that creative team that will make the show. So he does a very interesting hire. For the book writer, then, he hires Bekah Brunstetter. This is not a household name. Bekah had some success as an off-Broadway writer, wrote lots of plays that were produced all over America in small regional theaters and in the small private theaters in New York. She came from a very strict Southern conservative family. So in a way, she brings to this story, aside from her great talent as a writer and writing social commentary about our world we live in today, she's very caustic, she's very sharp, she's very funny, sad in the way she writes. But this family background of the conservative Southern class-conscious family, her father was a senator. The family was deeply religious. She was the only girl in a family with two brothers. She was very protected, so she immediately went out in the world and started writing very raunchy plays. Her first play of great success had a 4-letter word in the title, and I can't quite imagine that the conservative family put that book in their family bookcase. But in any case, she's a very interesting writer. Her most successful off-Broadway play was a work called Cake. Many of you remember that there was that great trial when a gay couple went to a bakery and ordered a wedding cake, and the baker refused to make it, and it ended up all the way in the Supreme Court. So she writes a very caustic, it's her most celebrated plays, over 200 major productions of Cake, all over the world, and it deals with this issue. But she's a very clever writer who's able to bring humor to very dark themes. So in a way, Bekah becomes perfect for this. She also had a career for many years on television as a writer. She did a television show called This Is Us. And it would be nominated for 3 Emmy Awards over a 3-year period, and also she produced it. So she had a lot of writing experience and knowing what was popular. So she becomes perfect to take on this project. But she makes several very strong choices that makes the work unique. She's very true to the novel, much more so than she is to the film. And in the novel, she makes several important changes. The novel takes place at the end of the 1930s, going into the beginning of the Second World War. In the story, Noah goes off to war, fights in the war at the Battle of Bulge, and has his knee injured. Allie goes off to a very good posh school, becomes a very polished young woman. And so when they meet again, they have been very changed by time. But Bekah decided to move the story up. So she sets it in the 1970s, before the Vietnam War. The thing that it does, it takes us to the present, which makes the story so pertinent and so vital. Because again, even from the time that Nicholas Sparks wrote his novel, we know so much more about Alzheimer's. And we have been so exposed to Alzheimer's that it becomes a very different story. So very wise choice. But the biggest choice that Bekah makes, we know that in the novel, we meet the young couple when they're teenagers. We meet them again after a 7-year period. In the novel, she says it's 10 years, or in the play, she says it's 10 years, but that's really incidental. After a time period, they reunite after their characters have been seriously formed. And then we see the old couple looking back on their lives. It really is a flashback story. So she uses this, but she decides to delineate 3 Allies and 3 Noahs. So we see the teenage Allie and Noah, we see the more sophisticated young adults, and then we see the old incarnation after life has battered and bashed down a body and a life of pain and suffering. We see this old couple trying to cope with, trying to remember, trying to have Allie remember who she was. So she makes this brilliant choice. It plays out wonderfully. Musically, what happens in the story is that we have this opportunity of wonderful harmonies. I want to remind you, I can't tell you for certain that Bekah was influenced by this, but the influence is clearly here. Just at the turn of the coming of the 20th century, August Strindberg would write a series of plays. When everyone was writing very realistic, very naturalistic plays, he started writing very expressionistic plays, which meant that Strindberg believed that the real truth of who we are is what we are inside, our fantasies, our daydreams, our hallucinations. And so all of this is brilliantly manifested in the way this story is told, the way this story is staged. Watch how often the three Allies or the three Noahs or all six of them swirl around the old Allie who's trying to put her mind into some kind of focus. It's pure expressionism. It's pure stream of consciousness, and it works so brilliantly in this story. And then the producer, Kevin, would then hire two directors to do this show. And so we have Michael Greif, who's one of my favorite directors. I've seen more of his work as a New York director than anyone else. He worked for years at La Jolla Playhouse, but he would give us Rent, Dear Evan Hansen, Grey Gardens, so an extraordinary artist. And then he connected him with Schele Williams. We know her work from the revival of Aida and the new body of work that she did based on The Wiz that previewed at Playhouse Square and found its way to New York. So in the hands of great directors, wonderful material, beautifully told in this very surreal way. We have a magnificent love story that is more like a poem, that is more like a song cycle. Don't expect a traditional musical, but do expect to be profoundly moved by this incredible work, Notebook.